So, you remember I told you that we'd be meeting Thomas Babington Macaulay again. Well, it was sooner than you thought, because we'll be talking about specifically his thoughts on Indian education next time, and comparing them to reflections on a visit to England by an Indian Brahmin named T.N. Mukherjee. So that's for next time. I do also want to just point out the variety of extra credit opportunities on campus this week, right? So on the one hand, yes, if you revise paper 1 by Friday, you'll get extra points for that. But I also just, we've got those monks in the library making the sand mandala. So if you just go and watch for a little bit, take a picture, take a little video, whatever, and show that you were there, I will give you extra credit for that too, right? I realize that it is not in any way relevant directly to this class, but I do want you all to be just more generally culturally aware, so this kind of meets that goal. And along similar lines, Evelyn Leigh Espiritu Gandhi's lecture on refugee narratives. So she's specifically talking about Vietnamese refugees who came to North America or to Israel in the 60s and 70s. But I think we can probably still apply some of this stuff to immigrants from the Caribbean and from India who come to Britain in the post-war period. So I think this would still be something useful for you to go to. So if you can log in via the Zoom link on Canes Connect, and just if I see your name there in the participants list, I will give you some extra participation credit. So does anybody have any questions about anything regarding upcoming stuff or extra credit opportunities or assignments before we continue? Okay. So my basic plan for today is to talk a little bit about this presentation assignment. Then we'll go over the vocab words from last week, and then we'll get back into the Dickens. Okay, so I've given each of you what I hope is a reasonably individualized assignment here that I think is tailored to your interests. Peyton, if yours doesn't look as individualized as the others, I think it's because we can do this as a kind of visual argument piece. So I didn't change the topic as much as I might have with the others, but I think that we can still kind of suit this to what you're interested in and good at. So Ryland's, yours is going to focus on poetry and medicine in the First World War, like representations of medical disorders and injuries and medical care and things like that. So that's kind of the sources I've given you are geared towards that. And Kaylee, I've given you actually 2 options here partly because I didn't really know what the hell to do with the math. And partly because you also said that you were interested in music and were thinking of picking up a music minor. So the options I've got here for you is we can either look at kind of how immigration statistics in post-war Britain are reflected in the literature of the period, or you can look at the impact immigration had on British music culture. So I'll let you decide which of those paths you want to take. But as far as the basic rules here are concerned, right, you're each going to give a 20-minute presentation on your assigned topic. 20 minutes is the minimum. It's good to prepare more material because what's going to happen when you get up here and start talking?
Go faster.
You're going to start talking faster, right? Even if you're trying not to. So if you make sure that you have at least 25 minutes worth of stuff prepared, you'll be good, right? Plus, honestly, if you're on a roll, I'm not going to stop you. If you want to talk longer than 20 minutes, seriously, go for it. I have in the past had students, basically just run the whole class period, and it was totally fine, and they did a good job, and all was well, right? You don't have to do that. Don't feel pressured that you're going to have to do that to get a good grade. But if you do that, right, then it's not going to be a problem. Okay. So I've recommended some secondary sources to each of you. You're each going to have to use at least 3 secondary sources, and I will help you find them if you need that, right? How many of you have done research in our library before? You have, yes, I know you have. But you two have not.
Not in this library.
Okay. So one of the things that I wanted you to see, I've got a schedule here on the back. So I want to start meeting with each of you regularly, just once a week, to talk about the progress you're making on this and what your plans are and what you've got done. Just to make sure that everybody stays on track and is able to produce something, really good when your turn comes. Right, so I think, I've got it set up so that each of you will meet with me 3 times. So, right, anytime within those particular weeks. So, Rylan, we're gonna need to meet this week, and then for the 2 weeks following. And Peyton, your first meeting will be next week, and then Kaylee, you'll come in for the first time the following week, just based on when your presentation dates are. I will. I'll review your materials. I'll talk stuff over for you. I'll try, ask you probing questions, and just try to give you feedback on how you're doing before you actually have to get up here and talk. So in terms of kind of like basic general guidelines here, right? So one thing you might want to consider is what the classes you actually like going to most are set up like, right? Are your favorite classes usually the kind where you sit in a dark room with lots of tiny words crammed on a PowerPoint slide that the professor just kind of reads in a monotone voice? Typically those aren't people's favorites, right? So if you don't like that being done to you, right, don't do it to other people. So you can use PowerPoint, you can use, particularly if you have slides you want to show people. Like the thing that PowerPoint is best for is like visual stuff, right? It's not actually so great for putting a lot of notes on it. I think a lot of people kind of use it as a kind of crib sheet, right? It's like, okay, this way I don't have to have a lot of index cards in front of me. I've got all my notes up here and I can just read them off. Yeah, don't do that, right? Use it for pictures, right? If you're showing people pictures, that's what it's best for. You can also use any other kinds of visual aids you want. In fact, if there's something that the class can actually physically engage with, even if it's just like a handout or something, right? That's also probably a good idea. The point here is, right, engagement, right? You want to keep everybody's attention. You want to keep everybody, focused and interacting with you. In terms of the research part, right? So I've suggested a couple of sources to everybody. Remember that I want you to be using serious scholarly sources here, right? So nothing found through random internet searches. Don't use popular newspapers or magazines. Stick to scholarly reference works, to journals, and to books, right? And if you have questions about whether or not a particular source is appropriate, just come ask me, right? I'll happily look at it for you. Any questions so far?
Are the sources that you suggested, are those ones that we could go to our library, to the library here and find, or is that something that we would have to find elsewhere? You'll
probably have to, you don't have to find them elsewhere, but you will probably have to request them from elsewhere. And I will show you how to do that.
Okay.
So yeah, when we have our first meeting, if you haven't been able to gather the sources on your own yet, I will show you how to do that. The other thing you can do, and this will actually probably save you a lot of time and effort in the long run, do this for your final paper too. Schedule an appointment with the reference librarian. His name is John Wilson. You can reach him at this email address, and John's job is to help you find things in the library, right? That is what he is specifically paid to do. So if you just spend 10 minutes with John, you can save yourself hours of just kind of fruitlessly searching through the online card catalog, right? So probably the first thing you should do is take this assignment with you, set up a meeting with John, and see what he can get you, right? Other questions? Okay, so you're going to be graded on 3 things here, right? Like, one is your command of the material, right? So is the material you're presenting well researched and accurate? Do you display confidence in presenting this material? Do you seem like you are familiar with, at least familiar enough to explain it or teach it to someone else? You're also going to be graded on the quality of your supporting materials. Now, these can be things like the bibliographies that I give you. These can be visual aids. These can be PowerPoint slides, whatever, right? Anything that you create for the rest of the class to view or to interact with, right? These are your supporting materials. And finally, on the quality of your research, right? Do you have enough sources? Are they the right kinds of sources? So each of those categories is going to add up to 5 points. Everything together is 15 points total out of your 100-point grade. Okay. So does anybody have any questions about anything?
Do we have to use any primary sources or go through and find those, or just only secondary sources?
The primary sources will be whatever's assigned in the textbook for that date, right?
Okay.
So Ryland's primary sources will be whichever of the World War I poems we're looking at he chooses to work with. Payton's primary sources will be the 2 Virginia Woolf essays, the excerpt from The Room of One's Own and Professions for Women. And yours will then be any of the immigration essays that you, or immigration poems that you choose to work with. So that's what your primary sources will be. And yeah, these things listed on the front page are secondary sources.
Okay.
So my primary source is then the Victorian book.
Yours will actually all of your primary sources will be in the green one, the modern era book. Okay. Other questions?
You said I have multiple ones to choose from for the World War I.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to discuss all of the assigned poems.
Okay.
Just choose those that seem most relevant to your topic. And whatever you don't get to, I'll cover when you're done. Okay. Anything else? All right, let's quickly go over the vocab quiz and then jump back into Dickens. All right, utilitarianism. What is utilitarianism?
It's like the idea that for something to be useful, it had to either increase pleasure or decrease pain for the greatest amount of people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is one of the dominant Victorian philosophies, right, especially in Whig/liberal circles. And what text do we associate this idea with? There are actually a couple we probably could. Yeah, we discussed it directly when we talked about Carlyle and Sartor Resartus, right? You could probably also apply it to Macaulay or to Dickens, right? All right, the Hungry 40s. What were the Hungry 40s?
50 years of 1840 to 1849
Mhm.
when Great Britain experienced a Great Depression
Yes.
after investing in states in the United States and those investments failing.
Yep, we screwed them good. Yeah, so it's caused by bad investments,
Trade slums.
a trade slump, bad harvest. Yeah, this whole confluence of factors, right, that basically make the British economy collapse. And the government's response is austerity, right? It's like we're just going to hold back and not spend any money on anything, which then just kind of led to more suffering, right? All right. And what text do we relate this to?
Christmas Carol?
Yes, because part of the argument that Dickens is trying to make is get out there and start spending people, right?
Right.
He's trying to stimulate spending. Okay, good. Diogenes Teufelsdruck. It's fun to say. Who or what is Diogenes Teufelsdruck?
It's the professor character in Sartor Resartus, and
Mhm.
like it's the one who goes through, like, you hear his whole story of like how he lost his faith and then like found hope again in like his work.
Yes.
He was a preacher too, right? Like previously.
Carlyle was a
Carlyle,
preacher. Yeah.
oh,
So
okay.
so the cadences
Mhm.
of the sermon, are kind of are very much an influence on the rhetoric of Sartor Resartus. Yeah. But Teufelsdruck is never described as having been a preacher, but Carlyle was trained to be one.
Okay.
All right. Time in a post-industrial revolution sense. What are we talking about?
That's when time was, well, now, that's kind of now. Time is,
Yeah.
is mostly seen as synonymous with money.
Okay.
But we saw it during the Industrial Revolution where the hourly wage was set for people who
Yeah.
were working in factories and warehouses.
Yeah, so time gets standardized and commodified in a way that it wasn't before, right? Partly because you got to make sure all these trains are running on time and actually getting where they need to go, and partly so that you can divide the workday up into discrete units in order to figure out how to pay people, right? And what text do we associate this with, or texts?
I did the shoe letter.
Right.
A living wage for Patrick Elder Crew.
Yeah, because a big part of her argument is that like the working day doesn't leave her enough time for self-improvement, right?
And also how they had just passed a time bill, like an hourly wage bill for men.
Yeah.
For the women.
Yeah. And we could probably also include A Christmas Carol in this, right? Because of Scrooge's fixation on time. More on that today.
Right.
All right. Byronic hero.
It was like the protagonist who didn't want to be bound by society's rules, but was also like more brooding, like that didn't really lead to any other action, and so they kind of did nothing.
Yeah, it's exactly like this kind of Lord Byron hero who wanders around looking at things and brooding, right? Carrying this, the weight of some sort of deep, dark, heavy secret, but never really doing much of anything. And and this is from Sartor Resartus, right? Teufelsdruck follows this model through the everlasting no section and then rejects it, right? All right. Jacob Marley.
He was the co-business owner to Scrooge and came back to life as a ghost. And he has basically his wealth bound to him because he didn't use it to help others in his lifetime.
Yes, he's weighted down with these chains and cash boxes, right? He has to convince Scrooge that ghosts are real by taking off the bandage and letting his jaw drop, right? And another thing to note about Marley too, let's remember too, like even after his death, what does Scrooge keep? Like what does Scrooge keep on the sign of the counting house?
Keeps Marley's name.
He keeps Marley's name, and he continues to answer to it, right? He doesn't care whether people call him Scrooge or Marley, even though Marley's dead, right? So Scrooge seems to regard himself as almost kind of interchangeable with his former business partner. All right, the Gospel of Labor.
This idea that if you felt there was a void in your life that you're supposed to fill with work, like that's the only way to like fulfill your life is to work.
That's right. Yes. Know what thou canst work at, right? Yes. If you are feeling sad, if you are feeling empty, if you're feeling lonely and alienated, right, then put your shoulder to the boulder and get to work. Right? And this is Carlyle. This is Sartre the Sartres, right? Kind of the central philosophy that he's actually expounding here underneath all this philosophy of clothes and whatnot. All right, Whig theory of history.
That's a theory that history is only progressing in a positive direction, that it's going from its barbaric past to a more civilized future. Only like regardless of what humans do, is going to be like working itself out. That was Macaulay's insane argument. And his like rebuttal to Robert Southey.
Yeah. So Southey wants to go back to a past that he thinks was prettier, right? But was clearly, in other ways not as good as the present is, as the future will be. You know, that the Industrial Revolution represents progress, and progress is always good, right? In the Whig theory of history. So one thing to remember too is that the Whig theory of history tends to celebrate things that the Whig Party thought was good as well, right? So things like personal liberty, free trade, stuff like that. That all of that was going to contribute to making the world better.
Macaulay was also the one that like prophesied about 1930.
Yes, that was in imagine what the world will look like in 1930.
Imagine.
Because things only get better. Yeah. Okay, Thomas Malthus. Who remembers Thomas Malthus?
Oh, he was the economist who had that whole idea about the surplus population and basically was like, the poor should just be left to die.
That's right.
One of my favorite parts of the Christmas Carol is when the Ghost of Christmas Present was like mocking that. It's so screwed up.
Yeah, twice.
Yeah.
Right? Twice he digs the Malthus screws in there. Right? Yeah, Malthus is the guy who argues that food resources grow arithmetically, right, via addition. Population grows geometrically, that is by multiplication. So you will eventually always end up with more people than you have resources to feed them. And the only way to really deal with that is to let nature take its course. Because, God forbid you encourage people to marry later or have fewer children or, what have you, right? Okay. And finally, the philosophy of clothes.
That's the philosophy that clothes being used as a metaphor as like the human institutions that people tend to hide behind to cover their real selves, like religion, government, economy. Things like that. That's part of Carlyle's argument as well.
Yes. It's Teufelsdruck's philosophy, right? It's the thing that he's invented. And like when your suit of clothes wears out, as it inevitably will over time, right? You stitch together a new one. And so his gospel of labor is the kind of new suit that he replaces his prior conventional Christian beliefs with, right? It's the new suit he fashions for himself. Okay, so let's get back into Dickens then. So, is there anything that y'all want to talk about today from today's reading? Any questions you have or observations you want to make?
I noticed how the ghost of Christmas Yet to Come kind of has a resemblance to, like, what's the common death guy? Grim Reaper, thank you. And he doesn't speak. Like he's in death.
Yeah, and I think another kind of interesting thing about that figure is what's the only direction he ever points in? Did you notice?
Just down or forward?
Forward, yeah. He always points forward. Because what is he the ghost of?
Future.
Yeah, the future, right? Christmas yet to come. So I kind of wonder if this ghost is, in some ways, a kind of subtle parody of that Whig theory of history, right? This is just something that I'm spitballing off the top of my head right now. That like it just that this idea, that the future must always inevitably be better, right? Now, what do we learn about the future from this particular section of the text?
You mean for Scrooge? And like,
Well, just generally, yeah.
We learned that poor Tiny Tim dies.
Yes.
And,
yes.
Scrooge dies inevitably. Things were still, it didn't seem like things really changed. Like they were still, like there was like people that stole from Scrooge, like ransacked his house.
Yeah, yeah.
Like there was still, it didn't seem like people got inevitably better in any way. It was just,
Yeah. Certainly not in that Macaulay-esque way, right?
right.
That, in fact, like the future that is envisioned, if Scrooge maintains his current path, right, is worse
Right.
than the present. Now, what else do we thus learn about the future then? Though? Is it fixed?
No.
Yeah, in fact, even as the ghost of Christmas Present tells Scrooge, if things continue on their current trajectory, right, this is what will be, right? But that if there is the operative word, that the future is constantly in motion and is actually changeable, depending on what human beings do, specifically what Scrooge does, right? Now, there are certain things that are not changeable. I've always kind of thought it a little bit funny that he wants to sponge off the writing on that stone at the end, right? Because, I mean, like, does the ghost give any indication of when he's going to die? No, I mean, that vision could be many years in the future, right? Now, it does give him, a vision of him, dying, alone, without comfort, and then being buried in a lonely place, right? But, that writing on the stone, that's going to happen no matter what. But it's funny that is also kind of like what really, the thing that seems to terrify him most, right? And to pull the promise out of him to live in past, present, and future. Is in what dimension of time, right, of these three has Scrooge been living pretty much exclusively?
The present.
Totally a creature of the present. Yes, exactly. he's largely forgotten his past, and he goes about his business with no real regard for the future. So he needs to learn to consider all three of these as a whole, right, rather than as discrete units that can be ignored when they're inconvenient. In fact, like we talked a little bit about allegory last time. Do y'all remember what an allegory is?
It's a story with two or more meanings to it.
Yeah, with different levels of meaning, right? So you've got the literal meaning, and then symbolic meaning that is, intentional is attached to it, right? So if we look even at like this picture on page 289 here, what's Scrooge doing there?
You said 289?
289, yep.
He's pushing the hat down.
Yeah, the Ghost of Christmas Past has this cap, right? That can be used to extinguish its light, right? Because like basically what like he's the ghost is kind of like a candle, right? And the hat is essentially a giant candle extinguisher. And so that extinguisher is Scrooge kind of like pushing out his own memories or suppressing his memories. Right, so it's kind of a physical representation of that. But let's go back and look at the overall physical representation of each of the ghosts and think about like how in terms of allegory what might be going on here. So if we look on page 279, we've got our description of the Ghost of Christmas Past. Can somebody start reading that for us? Starting with, "It was a strange figure." And just read those two paragraphs.
I would.
Thank you, Reverend.
It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having proceeded from the view, and being diminished to a child's proportions. His hair, which hung about his neck and down his back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were like those upper members bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in his hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strange thing about it was that from the crown of his head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of his using in his duller moments a great extinguisher for a cap, which he now held under his arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality, for as his belt sparkled and glittered now in one part and now in another, and what was light one instant at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts, no outline, will be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it should be itself again, distinct and clear as ever.
Okay, thank you. So let's just kind of sit with this for a second and think about like which of these features that are described here seem kind of like symbolically resonant when we think about the past, right? How in what ways do these things represent like almost like visual symbols for the past?
I would think maybe the whole like as it's looking like old versus young and like almost shifting back and forth. It might be like almost like where it was taking Scrooge back through like the stages of development and going from old like young to old.
Yeah.
Like it follows the same path in its own appearance.
Yeah. So we got stages of life all at once, right? Okay, good. What else? What about the arms? The long and muscular arms with hands that look like they have a hold of uncommon strength. What might that have to do with the idea of the past?
Maybe like the hands are strong because they're constantly holding on to the person.
Yeah, you can't get away, right?
Yeah.
The grip of the past is strong. Good. It's got fresh green holly and summer flowers.
Maybe because summer's before winter. I mean, that's in the past.
Okay, well, yeah, but I think like maybe like in terms like what we've got here is like all seasons represented, right? I mean, holly blooms in the winter, right? Flowers in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
We've already talked a little bit about the extinguisher, right? You know, this is essentially what Scrooge has helped to craft this imaginatively by suppressing his memories. But what about the way it constantly, like its appearance seems to constantly shift and become indistinct, and various, sometimes it has one arm, sometimes 20, right, and so on and so forth, right? What do you think is going on there? What might that be a reference to?
Maybe how you interpret the past is always a little different, kind of.
Yeah, like our memory is an imperfect instrument, right?
Like how you were saying how Scrooge has tried his best to forget his past. And it was like memory, like faint memories, like coming back. You know, like you have like faint memories and you realize little parts of it, but you can't remember all of it.
Yeah,
so it's like always
right. Like so, some like you remember like little weird like fragments sometimes, right, from your childhood, but you don't have any context for it, or I think that's exactly what's going on. Is this kind of fragmentary nature of our memories. Now, if we take this same process and try to apply it to the Ghost of Christmas Present on page 290, and there's actually something I want to consider about some of the illustrations here as well. We'll get to that in a minute. Can I get somebody to read the paragraph that starts with "Scrooge reverently did so"?
I can do it.
Okay, thank you.
Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple deep green robe or mantle bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, and it disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice.
Mm-hmm.
Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holy wreath set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its gentle face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust.
Okay, thank you. So there are a couple of items here in the Ghost of Christmas Present's appearance that are also symbolically resonant here. Right? So can you figure which ones do you think might be important or might indicate something about what we're supposed to think about the ghost's nature? if something seems weird, it's probably obviously symbolic, right?
I mean, his bare breasts and feet.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about like it's friggin' cold in London in December, right? Yeah, he's got the icicles in his car. So yeah, why the bare breast? What might that indicate? His capacious breast was bare as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice.
Maybe like the message of like opening up, so he's like, you see his purity inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honesty. Right. He hides nothing. What about the open hand? You know, why would he have an open hand?
It's welcoming. Like, join me. I don't know.
Okay, well, welcoming might be part of it. There's also, when we refer to someone as open-handed, what do we usually mean about them?
Sort of giving?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. The open hand represents generosity. And then at the end of the paragraph is probably the weirdest thing about the ghost's appearance, right? Girded around its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. So do y'all know what a scabbard is? Okay, so it's the sheath that a sword is kept in, right? But there's no sword in it, and it's eaten up with rust.
Was Britain?
What were you about to say?
Oh. Well, was Britain kind of done with most of its like fighting maybe with France by this time? Like maybe it was like there was maybe a little season of peace, and so maybe they don't have a weapon anymore.
That is exactly what it represents, peace, yes. And I think it's probably a general representation of the spirit of the season rather than what's specifically going on historically in Britain. But yeah, in the 1840s, Britain and France are not at war. That's largely done in the 1820s. Like essentially, kind of once Napoleon is captured and sent off to his island exile, where he was probably poisoned. Then the Britain and France don't go directly to war with each other again for a good bit. Okay. And then we have our ghost of Christmas yet to come. And do you notice that each of these physical descriptions also gets briefer with each of these ghosts? That we had a very long and complex description of the ghost of Christmas past, and then the ghost of Christmas present is a little shorter, and then the ghost of Christmas future is very, very brief indeed, right? It was shrouded in a deep black garment, page 305, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible, save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night, and separated from the darkness by which it was surrounded. So how do we read the future ghost here allegorically then?
The future creeps up on me.
Okay. I mean, like, this is the only ghost that's genuinely scary, right? And what's scary about the future?
It's uncertain.
Yeah, you don't know what it's going to be, right? I mean, do not, freak out when I say this, right? But, I know that, standing up here, right? I could have a heart attack and, drop dead right in front of you any minute, right? Like, it's not likely, I'm not I'm not that old and reasonably healthy. Right? That actually has happened here on this campus a long time ago. It was a psychology professor was legally dead for about a minute. But one of her sociology colleagues down the hall had been a paramedic at one time, and he ran down the hall and revived her.
That's crazy that it was psychology. Like the coincidence of that.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of GSW lore for you.
Yeah.
Neither of those people are here anymore. But like the point being, like anything can happen, right? Which is what makes the future scary.
Right.
It's indistinct. You can't see what it's going to be, right? It's shrouded in darkness. And the only thing you know is that it's going to keep pointing forward. So, there are a couple of other things. We've got about 10 minutes left, so there's just a couple of other quick things I want to hit on here. So, the first thing I want to draw your attention to is something to do with the pictures, right? I want you to look first for a second on page 272 at the picture of Scrooge with Marley's ghost. So, take a minute, take it in, absorb it. And when you feel you have sufficiently absorbed it, turn back to page 291 and the image of the Ghost of Christmas Present with Scrooge. And then when you feel you've got that, you've got that basic image etched in your mind, turn to page 319 and the picture of Scrooge with Cratchit. And I want you to think about, for a second, what these pictures have to do with each other. These are all from the original publication.
I think one of the biggest differences you can see, like, in progression throughout the things is, like, each one, the characters get happier in the photos. So, like, it starts off and, like, both the, like, Marley's ghost and Scrooge are pretty solemn. It's dimly lit, like, nothing really happening. And then by the time you get to, like, the Ghost of Christmas Present, Scrooge at least has a sort of smile, and the ghost is certainly happy. And then by the end, you get to, like, the other two, and they're both smiling and seeming to have pretty good time.
Yeah, and I think there is definitely a progression, right? And in each picture, the light seems to be brighter, right? Each picture gets brighter. And what do you notice about the composition of all three pictures? In terms of, like, the location, and like where all the figures are placed.
It looks like it's the same room, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Or a similar room, and then...
Yeah. They're all in front. Yeah, the Marley's Ghost and the Scrooge's Third Visitor picture are both taking place in the same spot, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas, the final picture of Scrooge with Cratchit is probably taking place in the office. But it's still taking place, like, in front of a fireplace, right? So in each of these pictures, you've got two figures in front of a fireplace.
But it seems like the pictures are also getting it's like more personal, like getting closer to the characters.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're right. The first, I hadn't actually thought of this, but yeah, it seems like the first picture is almost kind of panned out.
Mm-hmm. And then
And the figures look a little small, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of gets closer with the ghost, the Christmas present, and then when it gets to Scrooge and Bob Cratchit, they're like, it's closer up. You can see both of them.
Yeah.
Closer. You can see that Bob looks a little worried, sitting on the edge of the seat.
Yeah, I like that bit, where Scrooge says he's going to raise Bob's salary, and Bob wonders if he should whack him with a board and go get the guys from the nut house.
There's also a comparison between the present, the Ghost of Christmas Present, and Scrooge, as if he's sharing his joy like the present share with him.
Yes, good, yes. That's Scrooge is in the Ghost of Christmas Present position in the final picture, right? Yeah. I mean, he's back by his old seat, but now he's sharing out the punch, and everything is warm and steaming, right? And I think one thing that we didn't talk about, but I think is worth thinking about, is there's this kind of hot, cold, light, dark binary throughout the whole novella, right? There are things that are good seem to be warm or give off warmth and light, and things that are not so good are described as cold.
Also, Scrooge just looks warmer and more healthy in his face in the last picture than he does in the first one.
Yeah, he actually looks a little chubbier, right?
Right. I think he's made to look more cherubic.
Yeah. No, his face is very kind of pinched and narrow in the first two pictures, and here, it's his head is round, and it's. All right, so there's one more thing that I do want to just pay some quick attention here, because I think it's a big part of Scrooge's education. I want to look at kind of what he's got going on when he is looking on at his nephew Fred's Christmas party. So what do Fred and his wife and their friends spend most of their time doing at this party?
Making fun of Scrooge.
They make fun of Scrooge. I kind of enjoy that bit too. So the one protest that you should have regarded a bear as the correct answer.
Yeah.
But they were also playing games and just doing stuff all together.
Exactly. Yeah. Most of the time they're playing games, and Scrooge is kind of competing vicariously in the games with them, right? So let's think about why can't we envision Scrooge playing games before this?
Kind of seemed like the only thing he felt like was worthy of time was something that would make him money. Games don't make him money, so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, games are, at least if you look at them from a certain perspective, a total waste of time, right? A game is literally something that we do merely for enjoyment that has no practical end. But that also connects us to other people, right? Now, there are, game. I know that a lot of contemporary gaming is solitary, right? Done on a computer. Although even a lot of computer games you can play over a distance with other people. I tried playing World of Warcraft years ago, and it actually kind of irritated me that people kept bothering me. It's do you want to go on a quest? No, no, I don't want to group up. I just want to solve this mission and have my little imp and cast spells, and that's it, right? So yeah, I guess cooperative gaming wasn't really for me, at least in that sense. But I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons,
Right.
and that's something you can't play by yourself, right? You know, but it is like it's a cooperative, imaginative experience, right? It's something you do with other people to build social bonds that has, again, like no practical end. So, you know, when you know we root out that den of orcs and get their treasure, right? I don't actually get to spend that treasure on anything, you know. You know, just as when Scrooge is playing, you know, Yes and No and Blind Man's Buff, along with Fred and Topper and the niece and all these people, right? Like, there's no practical result or practical end to any of this. They're just having fun. And I think, like, that's a big part of what Scrooge needs to learn here, is that it's okay to waste time. Or, you know, time spent doing something that's not profitable isn't necessarily time wasted. So that's pretty much what I've got for you here. There's more we could do with this, but we're close to the end of time. Do any of you have any questions or observations about this?
Okay, so when I would watch The Christmas Carol, and then like now that I've read it, I still never understood Tiny Tim's purpose. Like, I get that he's like a little boy, but like there seems like there's more. He's supposed to be more significant than what.
Okay, yeah. There's actually a whole body of research that talks about figures like Tiny Tim, kind of what like it, particularly in what is often called disability studies. And one of the common disability studies reads of Tiny Tim is that he's used the way disabled people are often used in literature or in media, right, as kind of like an easy focus for sympathy, right? That, you know, oh, you know, we pity the poor disabled kid, right? Go ahead.
Sorry, it's like that scene when he's talking about how he's in church and he's hoping that they'll see him as like a symbol, you know, for his disability.
Yeah, his very visible crutch and his little iron frame and all that, right? Mm-hmm. But I think there is actually something kind of more specific going on here in that, right, Tim is a child whom we're told is very much alone thinking about things frequently, right? Mm-hmm. And we've also seen Scrooge in the schoolroom as a lonely child. Right. And so I think that what's going on here with Tiny Tim, and why Scrooge is so wrapped up in the fate of Tiny Tim, it's not specifically because he cares that much about disabled children, right, or about Bob Cratchit's family. I think there's a kind of personal identification there with loneliness.
Because, you know, they both die in the future visit as well.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it too, like, even from Macaulay's other essay talking about like health and like wellness and like well, our mortality rate is better, but like from what we kind of know of industrial evolution, there are like some more injuries and other things, and like medicine might have progressed, but maybe people couldn't afford it, and so maybe it was also like, well, this could be prevented, and that death could be prevented if people were generous and helped. If resources were distributed
more evenly, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. That we're at the in the final chapter, the final stave, right? We find out that the basically the cure for Tiny Tim's illness was more money, right? Once his father starts making a better salary, and can get him medicine and get him properly fed, right? He gets better. So I think that's right, and I think I think there are a lot of very complicated things going on with Tiny Tim. I think those are just kind of two directions that we could take in reading this character. But we are actually out of time now, so let me give you the reading questions for next class.